Welcome to Voices and Visionaries, the podcast featuring the female forces in sports media. I'm Kelly Burke, and joining me today is the immeasurable Lesley Visser, pioneer, friend, and voted the #1 female sportscaster of all time. Lesley is the gold standard for reporting, a career that spanned more than 45 years at CBS Sports, ABC Sports, and the Boston Globe. A list of firsts that is exhaustive. And some of them include the first woman in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, the first NFL female beat writer, first woman on Monday Night Football, first woman to present the Lombardi Trophy at a Super Bowl, first female sportscaster to carry the Olympic torch. And that is just naming a few. Lesley, I wish we were doing this in person, but it is so good to see your face. How are you?
Hello, my friend, and for all the people who watch and listen, I did not know until just now I'm a native Bostonian and that you actually first followed the Red Sox and the Celtics and the Patriots.
I did, yeah. I grew up for 10 years in New Hampshire, an hour away, a small town called Hollis, New Hampshire, an hour away from Boston. And so that's what was ingrained in me from a little girl, and that's who my dad and my brother watched growing up. And then we moved to Phoenix, and that's when I actually started playing sports, was in Phoenix. And it was the year the Phoenix Suns happened to go to the NBA Finals. And it was when they had Charles Barkley and Kevin Johnson and Dan Marley and that whole team. And so I literally, every game, we would listen to Al McCoy on the radio and we would watch them on TV. And so I became this diehard Suns fan, and that's just how the whole love of sports started for me.
Well, that was such a great team to follow. And of course, anybody then who ran into Michael Jordan, it didn't really go that well in the finals, did it?
No, it didn't. And what's funny is, Lesley, I, for years after that Game 6 loss in the NBA Finals when John Paxson hit that shot to sink the Suns, I despised Michael Jordan. And obviously I've gotten over that. And I love the documentary, obviously, that was on ESPN. But yeah, there was at least a 5-year period where I just couldn't stand Michael Jordan because he beat the Suns.
He was one of only 2 people that I actually felt nervous a little bit to interview. The other, of course, was the great Ted Williams growing up. And I do not hear that argument that DiMaggio was a better hitter than Williams, because he wasn't. So Ted, who said, I just want people to say there goes the greatest hitter who ever lived. And I believe he was. But I remember Michael Jordan. I'd been in TV. I was working both for the Globe and CBS. And of course, we had mostly the Lakers-Celtic finals, and Houston was in there. But then Jordan came on the scene, and he was just so gifted. I'd covered it Final Four when he hit the shot against Georgetown, and rest in peace, John Thompson. But I was a little bit nervous, and we were on the court after the game, and he put his hand in the small of my back, and we were coming back. Brent Musburger was throwing it to me, coming back from commercial, and he just said to me, "I'll get you through this." He was 20 years younger.
Oh, that's hilarious. Lesley, when you were growing up, there were no female sports writers, literally none. Your mom was a huge influence in your life. How did your mom change the course of your life when she told you sometimes you have to cross the path when it says don't walk?
Thanks for asking, Kelly. Yeah, I was one of those kids that other kids love poetry or music, but I love sports. I mean, I learned to score the double play 6-4 to 3 when I was about 8 years old in Fenway Park. I didn't get to go very often, but I really cared if they moved the runner over. And I had an authentic love of sports. My family moved around quite a bit when I was young, and we were living in, I think, Cincinnati, and I was about 10. My mom was a teacher. And she said, "Hey, you have any idea what you think you might want to do when you're older?" And I said, "I want to be a sports writer." And she didn't say, "Oh, you can't do that. Girls don't do that." She said to me, "That's great. Sometimes you have to cross when it says don't walk."
That's amazing. I mean, just the foresight and to think the impact it's made on you all these years later.
Many people, women, get their love of sports from father. They grow up, watching the NFL or NBA, whatever. And my dad was born in Amsterdam. He knew nothing of American sports. He didn't come here until Holland was liberated. Of course, they were under the German boot from 40 to 45. Hitler bombed Rotterdam in 40. And so, everybody was broke and poor and living under the Hitler regime. And so when he came here, he knew nothing. And, to raise this child who loved such American football, basketball, baseball, instead of even what I would consider arcane, in the Netherlands, it's speed skating. So, yeah, I had a quite an unusual childhood.
You wrote in your book that you accepted the scar tissue that comes with being a trailblazer. Why has your passion always outweighed the struggle?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I looked at it as I was so grateful for the opportunity. So in all those years, actually still to this day, CBS still keeps me on. And I'll detour a little bit here. At the Super Bowl last year, how players, they don't really know how old you are, or some of them, or what's happening. And so some player, I had a baseball cap on, and some player was giving me the, yo baby thing after the game. And I looked at him and I said, "Are you kidding? I'm on Medicare." And he went like, "Oh no!" Like, I still have that attitude of gratitude. I'm glad CBS keeps re-upping me, and I think I always had that, so that even in the trying times, and there were plenty of challenges, I looked at it like, gosh, my dad grew up under the Nazi occupation, and I'm being paid to go to Wimbledon or the Final Four, the Super Bowl. So I don't have that much to complain about.
How hard were the early years in the NFL when you were the first female NFL beat writer and women weren't allowed in the locker room at the time?
There were no provisions for equal access until I think about the 7th year that I covered the NFL. I used to stand in the parking lots. Nobody could even imagine the concept of equal opportunity in that context. And then there were some really progressive. Pete Rozelle started to open up the locker rooms in the early 80s, and David Stern was way ahead. Of course, needed publicity at the time, but he was very. And I remember, of course, our mutual great buddy, Chris Brennan. Chris and I were covering a Redskins-Giants playoff game, maybe 82, 83, something like that. And we asked the PR guy, the legendary Ed Kroke. He said, "Who do you want?" We said, "Well, of course, we want Phil Simms and we want Lawrence Taylor." And now we're waiting out in that long corridor under the bowels of the old Giant Stadium. And all of a sudden we see the PR guy, Ed Kroke, coming with somebody that Chris and I did not even recognize. We're whispering, "Do we know this guy? Did this guy play?" So it was just a constant adjustment in those early years.
You gave me your book a couple years ago when it came out, and I'll plug it right now. So good. It's so many amazing stories in it. Sometimes you have to cross when it says "Don't walk," and it's a memoir about your life and your career. And I was rereading it this week, and it just blows my mind that you had to stand out in the parking lot for so many years waiting for players to come out on their way to the car because you couldn't go in the locker room.
Yeah, it seems, I'm so glad now that people find that like it's, from the 1800s, not the 1800s. But it just took, they had no ladies' rooms when I started because there were no other women. So there are lots of things. The credential that I actually wore to the game said on the credential, "No women or children in the press box."
Wow.
So it was a real frontier, but I mean, my God, I just feel so blessed. I've been on the field, when Vinatieri's field goal went through, and Bob Kraft said, it was right after 9/11, and Bob Kraft said, "Today we are all patriots." I've been at all those buzzer beater Final Fours, all the Celtic Lakers, and now, as you probably know, we have a show. I never thought I would see this.
Yeah.
We have a show on CBS called We Need to Talk that is produced by women. Emily Deutsch is the executive producer, along with Suzanne Smith, who I think you spoke to, our great director. The other producers, Julie Carrick, Amy Samuelson, and all the panelists and contributors are women. So it is just a fantastic for me to see that distance that women have come, and CBS really supports it. Sean McManus and David Burson and Harold Bryant. So the men are behind it too, and it gives all of us real pride.
Yeah, as it should, and it's such an amazing show. And the part I love is just the staying power that it's had. This wasn't something that was started a year ago. It's been around now for several years, and to see you involved in it and all, I mean, there's some really amazing women behind the scenes and on camera that rotate in throughout the show depending on the subject in the week, and it's a must watch.
Thank you for that. We have real rock stars. We did a show not long ago, of course, on Black Lives Matter, and Katrina Adams, who got some quarterfinals at Wimbledon, and of course Layla Ali, Swin Cash, Lisa Leslie. The hosts are people. They're all rock stars. There's Amy Trask and Andrea Kramer and Tracy Wolfson. So everybody, Tina Servasio, really great women who contribute.
Lesley, in 1987, you transitioned from writing for the Boston Globe to TV full-time. What was it about television that intrigued you so much?
I actually started earlier than that, but I was still with the Boston Globe. My first assignment, can you imagine this? 1984, the Celtics and the Lakers.
Oh my gosh.
Nuts. And I had no TV experience before that, none. So, but I knew what I was looking at. I'd covered NBA finals for the Boston Globe. I'd covered an awful lot of basketball. I was actually Rick Pitino's beat writer when I was 21 at the Globe, and Rick was 22 at Boston University, which was wild because we were both young, and I could try leads writing that were crazy and could try crazy defenses because nobody really was reading me or watching Boston University. But the Boston Globe, CBS came to me, Ted Shaker and Neil Pilson, and they said, we had a woman who knew television, the great Phyllis George, but she didn't know sports. So, she was so miss her this day, but she wasn't required to recognize a safety blitz or box and one. So they said, this time we want a woman who knows sports, and we'll teach you the TV. And it was quite an adjustment at first. I pretty much looked like I had rigor mortis.
So what helped you in the transition? Because obviously you mastered it pretty quickly.
Thank you. I think I told myself that I'd written for 10 years on deadline, and I said, okay, now you're just speaking on deadline instead of writing on deadline. So the mechanism was the difference. I mean, I still could see it in my head. I could shape what I wanted to know. But, there were lots of course, I had to do quite a few interviews about John Thompson. And, he was really tough. And I covered all those Big East years. And one time he had me thrown out of the locker room. And, it was really mortifying. I always say no one teaches you about humiliation. And I was kind of shocked and humiliated. And the great Dave Gavitt, who was, of course, the commissioner, he built the Big East. He said, this will not do. We have equal access for all our reporters. Of course, I was the only woman, so that meant me. And then John Thompson and I became great friends. He was such a proponent of social justice and his class, and really a man twice his size, and he was 6'10". And years later, I would go on his radio show a lot, and he would introduce me. Here's Lesley, who's still a pain in the ass.
Oh, that's great. You invented the sideline role as the first woman on Monday Night Football. Why was that role such a perfect fit for you?
Well, I started at CBS in the Madden Summerall years before I went to ABC. I went to ABC when CBS lost football. We lost it after the 93, the NFC Championship, when Fox came in, and that's when they paid all the money. CBS used to be the NFC, and it was great because it was the Bears and the Giants and the 49ers and the Cowboys. It was really in Green Bay. It was fantastic to be the NFC. So I loved football. I mean, I missed doing the Final Four when I went to ABC, but I thought, really, I'm just not ready yet to give up the NFL. But it was important. It's done a little bit differently now when everything's 24/7. But at the time, you could be a real reporter because you were the third person on a broadcast. And of course, many people, you've done sidelines yourself and play-by-play, you've done it all color. But people want to minimize it. And yet that is a set of eyes on the field. And if you're looking at the Super Bowl or the AFC Championship on CBS, the only people you are seeing are Tony Romo, Jim Nance, and Tracy Wolfson. So it is a three-legged stool, and much of what, Tracy, I think Tracy makes 50 cards or something every game.
You're so right. I'd estimate 80% of the stuff I prepare for every week never gets on the air. But you have it because you just never know if you're going to have a blowout or what's going to happen in the game. So you have to prepare for it all. It's interesting because, as you mentioned, I've done all the different roles depending on the sport. And I have to say the sideline role is the one that challenges me the most, from the standpoint that you almost have to be a psychologist at times when you're doing interviews with coaches, especially if you have to talk to a coach that is down 20 or 30 points at halftime, and you have to ask him a difficult question. You have to be able to read coaches really well, and you have to be able to think on your feet and be able to really succinctly present what you're going to say in 30 seconds or so, because you don't get a lot of time.
Yeah, that's a great point. One thing, I don't know if I'd seen this before, but I just decided to do it because those halftime interviews that are mandatory in the NFL, they weren't saying anything, they weren't going anywhere. So what I started doing was I would talk to a coach off camera going in, because they're not really saying anything. And I always called it making a Picasso out of a matchstick. They might be a little more comfortable saying something, and I could report that rather than the guy just stammering or clearly, not interested in talking right now. He wants to get in the locker room. So yeah. I found that helpful for myself. And when I used to have to interview Bill Belichick at halftime, I would just look at him like he knew that I knew that he knew that I know. So, there's the psychology in it.
Absolutely. You advised in your book the importance of taking risks. You've taken so many risks throughout your life and your career. What's a risk that you have taken in your career that you will never second guess?
Oh, I have a couple of the others that I'll tell you about. I have I feel nothing bad that I wanted to be a sports writer when the job didn't exist. I could handle doing Final Four for the Boston Globe and Wimbledon Open, the NFL, the World Series, contributing, in a couple of those. But I really was kind of fearless in that I knew I was authentic, and that was very to me. And I knew that I could represent my name, Visser. I could represent the Boston Globe, CBS, that I took it seriously, even though you probably can tell mostly I try to see what's funny in the moment. But I guess, if you have a dream, that's part of the deal, that step up to the plate and get a quality at bat.
You mentioned you have a couple risks that went the other way. Do you mind sharing one of them?
There was a legendary news executive producer at CBS named Andrew Hayward, and he was Dan Rather's producer in Vietnam. The guy was a legend, and he kept wanting me to do the early show, and really didn't. I didn't feel confident in it, and I didn't know if I cared about those segments, and so anyway, he said, no, Lesley, it's the same thing. Lesley, look how far you came by saying it's another challenge, flex a new set of muscles. So I did it. And honestly, Kelly, I was terrible. I was really awful. I tell people I didn't care about, at the time, well, I didn't care about the Canadian auto workers. I cared about Packers and the Bears. And I just didn't, I am a generalist. I mean, I was raised on more a Time household than a Newsweek, but it was a political, literary family I grew up in. And I was interested in the world, but I just wasn't interested in that job. And it really showed, and I was terrible. And Andrew Hayward finally said, thank God it's Friday, because we were out on the GM Plaza. That's where the CBS did the morning news, then right across from Central Park and the Plaza Hotel. Yeah. And it was a segment on upcoming Christmas toys. And it was Mr. Potato Head. And this is true. They were all lined up, Mr. Potato Head and his new lawnmower, whatever. And I said, oh, this is great, but what happened to Mrs. Potato Head? Like, did you get divorced? I mean, is she not well, right? And Andrew Hayward said, that's it.
I had no idea. That's crazy. I had no idea about that. Side note, too, I actually interned at the early show one summer in college. I was part of this IRTS summer fellowship program, and it was when Hannah Storm was one of the early show anchors and Harry Smith.
Hannah Storm is the one that they picked because, of course, Hannah Storm, right? She's brilliant. She is brilliant. She was brilliant at it, totally natural. And Andrew Hayward said to me at that Friday, he said, I don't even know why we bothered. It is going to be Hannah Storm. She's great. I love her.
Interesting. Your colleagues often talk about how your wittiness and your facility with words, your humor is legendary. Are those traits that you have always had, or is that something that you developed with experience?
No, I came from a really funny Irish family, and Boston is, I always tell people this, I was born in Boston, and if you're from Boston, you care about three things. You care about politics, sports, and art, talking, arguing, debating, laughing. So words are our theater, and when I was at the Globe, we're all in a million halls of fame, the people who wrote for the Globe, and you didn't take the floor unless you had something interesting, original, or mostly funny to say.
Our industry is particularly harsh on women, especially as we age. When we should be celebrating all of our experience, sometimes there are certain decision makers who are focused on looks. How did you gracefully navigate ageism?
Missed most of my hairdos and also my hat phase. I don't know if you remember that. Some of your observers might. I had no role models, right? So how do I know how to dress, at Lambeau Field when it's no degrees? So I remember a playoff game at the Bears, and I had what I thought was this really lovely electric blue hat, and all of a sudden the producer, I'm about to go on for the pregame show, and the producer, Ted Shaker, came running out of the truck to the field and said, take that hat off. It looks like a satellite dish. So I didn't always navigate that so well, but I just looked at it like, I think I have something to offer. I have quite a depth of knowledge as I've gotten older and a lot of experiences. And you know this too, Kelly. You've been around a little. When you look TV, the ones that you think are good and are authentic, they are. It is Tracy Wolfson and Michelle Tafoya and Susie Colbert and Erin Andrews and Pam Oliver. They do know what they're doing. So I feel good that people have been allowed to get better and stay around.
How important was it? You've had men along the way that have really advocated for you. I mean, Sean McManus comes to mind as one of them that get that it's the whole package.
I never was, a beauty queen, so that wasn't going to be what I offered. But I have, since I've never been hired by a woman, I've had men just really say, we believe in you and we're going to give you opportunity. And, the great Babe Zaharias, Babe Didrikson, she used to say, she probably was the best athlete, male or female, of the last century. And she used to say, loosen your girdle and let it fly.
I want to read a quote from your book that really, when I read it, it really stuck with me. And you wrote, "I would memorize my questions before I went into the locker room, so no one could accuse me of looking around." That resonated with me so much, because when I am asked by young women about what advice do I have for when they go into locker rooms, I literally tell them, whatever you do, don't look down. And so that what you wrote spoke to me. For people that are not female reporters and they don't go into locker rooms, how would you explain just how uncomfortable it is to go in a locker room?
Well, a couple of things there. I think that athletes now are used to it, which gives me great, it really serves me when I the Washington Redskins, that scenario where women are being harassed, because I think in 2020, the athletes have grown up seeing on television around the team, all through the Missouri Valley, they know you and have so much respect for you. So I think they've become accustomed. It's not a natural environment, but it is the place of business after the game. I mean, that's where you gather the information. And, most women that I see handle themselves terrifically. They're very professional. But I didn't want, for so many years there, I didn't want, while I was maybe gathering, how you tend to look around while you're gathering thoughts. So I just said, okay, I'm going to go in. Maybe if I miss a question, like, why did you hit one of the Houston Astros in the head? If I missed it, I missed it. But I felt like you have to be professional, which obviously you've been doing it a long time and you're considered very professional. So I would tell women not to nervous about it, but to be professional about it.
How did you handle when you had moments where, and obviously again, this wasn't 2020, this was years ago, but when it wasn't normal for a woman to be in the locker room and you had men and athletes in there being dismissive or making inappropriate comments? The Jim McMahon example in your book comes to mind as just something that would never be tolerated today, but back then it was kind of like the wild, wild west in the locker room.
Yeah, it's hard to put today everything that we know back into 25 years ago, 85 was ago, but Jim McMahon, I got along great with all those guys, and you have to picture the culture of the time was, so he gathered the team around. He said, "I have a Christmas present for you," and I was really surprised. I was after a practice. Everyone was in the locker room, all the reporters, and he said, "I have a Christmas present." I thought, wow, that's pretty great. And he dug around to the bottom of his locker, and it was a little box, and all the players came around, and I opened it up, and it was a negligee. And I didn't know what to do. Crimson, I didn't know what to do, but I was laughing and, put you in that spot. Have a sense of humor, but I was embarrassed. But he didn't mean it to be cruel. It was more that the time of that culture. And I think you have to have some notion of the environment isn't always perfect. Men have androgen, we have estrogen. There's testosterone in the environment, especially athletes. They've come through a lot. So I think they have to be mindful of you, and you have to be mindful of them.
You're such an advocate and cheerleader of other women in this business, more than anybody I know. Why is mentorship so ingrained in who you are?
Oh, thank you for saying that. You've always been a sister to me.
I remember from the first time I met you, and I want to say it was in 2011. I met you really briefly at the Awesome Convention in Charlotte, and I think I went up to you and told you that my mentor was Anne Liguori because you're close friends with Anne. I've just always been so taken back by your warmth and your approachability, and just the way you're so encouraging to every woman that you meet.
Oh, thank you for that. And how much do we love Anne Liguori? Now, you know how was smarter? Maybe you're doing this now. How much smarter was she than I am or we are? From the very beginning, she cataloged her own interviews. She owned them. She was up and down Madison Ave getting her own sponsors. I mean, I think she is not nearly honored enough. I think she's a giant in our business. But as for supporting the women, I remember when the Patriots, and the best people to me were black players, people like Sugar Bear Hamilton and Tony McGee, and they would let me go over to their house and watch the old film. It was actually on the old 8mm film to explain, okay, here's the 3-4 and here's the 4-3, and you watch the linebacker, the Mike linebacker, whatever. And one time I said to them, why are you so good to me? And Sugar Bear Hamilton said, because we know what it's like to be the only one.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I always thought that. So I don't want women. I didn't want to be the first. I wanted to be the first of many. And now we have them. You know, a young woman now can aspire to be you. She can aspire to coach. She can aspire to do, well, you do all these things, but she could aspire to radio. She could aspire to sideline. She could be a writer. She could be a team somewhere on the team staff. And that, I think that's fantastic because, men aren't born recognizing a cover two. They loved it, so they loved it, just like we did.
You're in 6 Hall of Fames, including the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame and the first woman in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. This spring, you became the first woman to receive a Sports Emmy Award for Lifetime Achievement. How full circle a moment was getting that award?
Oh, say it again. It was, Sean McManus called me and I was blithering. That's the only word. I was like, you can't say you have the wrong number. You can't say you made it up. And it meant so much to me. Of course, his father, legendary Jim McKay, won the first Lifetime Achievement Sports Emmy. And the list, and it's not that long. Some years they don't give it. They're either men who I idolized or they're men that I worked with. And I noticed that, I grew up listening to the Red Sox, to Kurt Gowdy called Red Sox on, my transistor under the blanket. It was so when the second winner, the first was McKay. But what I noticed about him, it was John Madden, Dick Enberg, and Vern Quist, and Al Michaels, and Pat Summerall. And what I noticed is that they're all storytellers. And that gave me just great encouragement because even in this world of digital and everything so fast, that the fact that the people they've honored are still storytellers, I felt gratitude for that.
Speaking of John Madden, he was somebody that you had the pleasure of working with side by side and that you can consider a close friend. You have so many great stories with him and you share several of them in your book, from ice fishing to cruising around in his bus. What is one of your favorite John Madden memories?
Oh, one of them, Anne Liguori was there, so were a number of our other friends, Cheryl Osias, and a whole bunch of us. One year, John gave me the Madden Cruiser for like 3 nights before Christmas, and his 2 drivers, Joe and Willie, and John didn't come, but he lived in the Dakota then, right across from John and Yoko, and he had all the girls over. I think there were about 35 of us. And he went around with a bottle of Jack Daniels and some paper cups. And that was his idea of hosting the Christmas party. And, so he lent all the girls his bus. And, he sort of waved. And we were going around to all the bars in New York. And John said, if you are going around to all the bars in New York on the cruiser 2 nights and you don't get lucky, you are a loser.
Oh, that's amazing.
He was fun. He was a true mentor. I learned quite a bit from him.
We're in very weird times right now with COVID, and it's a very unknown time, especially for young broadcasters coming up and young sports people coming up out of college who've just graduated. What advice would you give to them right now in these uncertain times about getting in our industry?
I think it's a time of real creativity, and usually that means opportunity. So that I believe those coming out of college now, they have to be able to pivot, and maybe they've already done it in college, but they have to know digital. They have to be able to set up, like you have set up their own Zooms, market their own podcasts. They have to be really very versatile now, and they have to stay in touch with people. A lot of times I've found that some young people they'll get rebuffed, and then that's the end of it. Okay, I'll go back to my dad's law office, or so it's going to take a lot of legwork. I mean, I teach a number of my friends' college classes. Like, everybody now is my best friend. They need a speaker for their class. But when I started being a sports writer, the writing was actually the least of it. The most of it was making phone calls, waiting for return phone calls, no answering services, no interrupt, nothing. So you'd make calls, you'd wait for return calls, you'd drive places, you'd show up, you'd go back to show up, maybe to confirm something. So I think it's that kind of industry that people are going to have to show. But I would say make connections, make sure that they know you. This is going to sound old-fashioned, but write thank you notes.
It's really good advice. Lesley, you've covered 35 Super Bowls, 35 Final Fours, World Series, the Triple Crown. The list goes on and on and on. Why have you been able to live out your wildest dreams?
Thank you for saying that. Sometimes I look at it and I say, God, is that the same person? I can remember pretty much the scene of each one. I had a couple of great pieces of advice besides my mother. One of them was at the Kentucky Derby, the great writer Red Smith. He was the first person to win the Pulitzer Prize for sports writing. Of course, he was with the New York Times. And at the Kentucky Derby every year, Red Smith would ask a young writer, I was still at the Globe then, he would ask a young writer to walk the infield with him. And that's before the infield was corporate. It was all, college with a supermarket, a basket full of food. And he would do this every year. And we walked maybe 4 hours, 5 hours before the Derby. We walked through the infield, and he said, Lesley, I want you to do this. No matter what you're covering, no matter where you are, make a memory. And I did that. So I have postcards. I mean, CBS sent me to the fall of the Berlin Wall to talk to Katharina Witt and see how sports would change in East Germany. And I have such postcards in my head, snapshots of what that was like. And I think then I was able to build on that. So now I have such a depth of reference, because I've been to so many, that I can talk to you about the Phoenix Suns in 1993. So I think that really helped. And the other piece of advice that you've probably heard her say it too, Kelly, was the great Billie Jean King. One time at Wimbledon, I think a lot of people don't know, she won 20 Wimbledon titles, 20, doubles, mixed doubles, singles. So she was always in the Wimbledon final. And one time over at Wimbledon, I said, Billie, what is the pressure of always being in the Wimbledon final? And she looked at me like she didn't understand it. And she said, are you kidding? Pressure is a privilege.
Such a good quote. It's so applicable, because what we do, it's hard, but it's also not rocket science either. And so you have to really be grateful that you're working, if you want to call it a job.
Work is a verb, and we all do it. And you have memories. I mean, my memories are just as joyous. I got to cover every one of NC State's games on their way to that unlikely title when they beat Houston, who had, Olajuwon, Benny Anders, that great team. And then I've been on the V Foundation board. So you just know where anything's going to lead. And I think you have to not look ahead. just what I said before, make every at-bat a quality at-bat. When I remember I had to cover box lacrosse when I was at the Globe, and I made that thing sing. I promise you, Kelly, you want to read about box lacrosse.
You had great advice in your own book. You said, own the moment.
Because it's not coming around again, and don't be distracted. You really need to bring it all down to, what am I looking at? Like right now, what do I see Serena Williams either doing or trying to do? Or what do what is Joe Burrow going to happen with him this year? Or Tua, who I think he has not been hit in practice. So it's possible that Tua Tagovailoa is going to take the field for the Miami Dolphins, having never been tackled, but never been hit. So I think you have to just bring it all down to, what am I seeing?
Lesley, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to share?
Well, I would like to share something for all the women who are watching. I say this from 4.5 decades of being in business. Do not overpluck your eyebrows because they don't grow back.
I would know, because I don't have many eyebrows to begin with.
Yeah, you color them in, but don't start and you won't have to make up for it.
In closing, I wanted to read one of the favorite lines that I have from your book. And you wrote about, in covering sports, you said, quote, "It gave me the chance to show women that we could be something different than a nurse, a teacher, or a secretary. When the Boston Globe told me I'd be covering the Patriots, I almost fainted. I felt like the entire world of feminism was on my shoulders. But deep down, I knew I would prove worthy of the task." Lesley, you certainly have proved more than worthy of the task. You are an inspiration. You are a role model for so many of us. You've become a dear friend, and I cannot wait till I can hug you in person.
Well, Kelly, thank you so much. And, in hearing that, I probably should have written that we can be equal. My mother was a lifelong teacher. There is no higher calling than a teacher, a nurse, or an assistant, or a secretary. But I didn't want women to be afraid to take a risk in something that was not natural, or something that they just, like think of Misty Copeland, right? The first ballet dancer with the American Ballet Company. I mean, there are so many. I mean, Sandra Day O'Connor. She probably always wanted to know the law, and I'm sure she didn't. Maybe she did start out saying, "I'm going to be the first female Supreme Court justice." I just want women to know that it's great to have a dream, and also it doesn't mean that it's always a linear path. That ground gained is not ground secured. So we know that from still being a woman in the business, but it's worth the risk.
Thank you so much for taking the time today. I've loved every minute of it, and I just appreciate you more than you will ever know.
Oh, thank you, Kelly. You're a champion. Thank you.